Imagine a war that never makes it to the news. A battlefield where the real enemy is not the one holding the gun, but the one giving the orders behind closed doors. This is the story of General Adrien Hale, a man who stood between a world ready to burn and the truth no one was willing to speak. Friendships will be tested, loyalties will crack, and a single decision may reshape the fate of nations. Stay with me till the end, because what happens in the silent war room decides the world you wake up in tomorrow. The room was quiet in a way that felt deliberate, a silence that did not simply exist, but was enforced, as if every sound that tried to form in the air was weighed, judged, and then denied the privilege to be heard. Dim overhead lights cast long shadows over the polished table, where maps of continents were spread with white pins and thin threads crossing oceans. The air carried the scent of old paper and steel, along with something heavier, something invisible, like the gravity of consequence. General Adrien Hale stood at the head of the table. His uniform was pressed flawless, but his eyes revealed an unrest that no discipline could cover. He had commanded armies, shaped strategies, and watched nations tremble, yet this moment pressed upon his chest with a weight he had never felt before. Across from him, the defense minister sat with his fingers folded, tapping once, then stopping, as if reminding himself that hesitation was a luxury they were not allowed. To his right, the intelligence director stared at a satellite image of a border zone that flickered on the screen. Rows of vehicles, tanks waiting behind a thin line of desert, soldiers like dots, lives as numbers, numbers that could multiply or vanish in a single order. No one spoke. Not yet. A soft hum came from the air filtration system, barely noticeable but constant enough to mark the passing of time. Time, which felt like both an adversary and a witness. Adrien inhaled slowly. Memories moved behind his eyes like distant reflections. The roar of engines, fields burning under foreign skies, the voices of young soldiers who believed him when he promised glory or honor or return. He had given many commands. He had witnessed many outcomes. But this decision was different. A single miscalculation could tear open a conflict that would not remain contained. Borders would dissolve into battlegrounds. Allies would transform into enemies. Families would be torn apart without ever understanding why. He was aware that history was not made by the loud moments. History was shaped in silent rooms like this one, moments where men and women sat with their fears, their beliefs, and the blood of their nations balanced between their fingers. General. The minister's voice was low, nearly cautious. We require your final recommendation. Adrien lifted his gaze. Outside the glass walls, the city moved unaware. Cars passed beneath streetlights. People walked with coffee cups and briefcases. Children pressed laughter into playground air, completely untouched by the decision forming here. Adrien stepped forward. His hand hovered above the map. His fingertips touched the edge of a borderline that had been drawn decades ago by men who never stood on its soil, never heard the language spoken there, never learned the names of its rivers or the sound of its rain. Lines were so easy to draw, so difficult to erase. He spoke quietly, but the room seemed to absorb every word. If we strike first, the retaliation will be immediate. The region will burn. There will be no restraint. No one moved. He continued, if we hold our position, we risk appearing weak. Our allies may withdraw support. Our influence may fracture. The intelligence screen shifted. A live feed, night vision, figures gathering near a border post. Adrien felt a tightening in his chest, a memory rising uninvited. He saw the face of a soldier from years past, a young man with bright determination, saluting him before the battle began. Adrien had remembered his name for years. Then the name faded, but the eyes remained. He drew in a breath that felt heavier than air. The decision before us is not simply about territory, Adrien said. It is about what we choose to value, our power or our humanity. The minister looked up. His eyes revealed something almost human beneath the hardened exterior. Fear, hope, doubt. The room felt smaller now. The lights felt dimmer. The silence deeper. Adrien rested his palm flat on the map. He felt the cold surface beneath his skin. The door behind them closed with a soft click. A messenger had arrived. A sealed envelope was placed on the table. The intelligence director reached for it slowly, cautious of whatever truth it carried. Adrien watched his pulse steady, but his thoughts racing. The envelope was opened. Inside was a single photograph, grainy, taken moments ago. On the border, a new flag had been raised, one that did not belong there. The minister exhaled, but no sound escaped. Adrien's jaw tightened. His eyes lifted toward the silent map once more. Every person in the room understood the meaning of the flag. The decision was no longer delayed. It had arrived. Adrien did not yet speak. His voice had to hold the weight of nations. The silent war room waited. The world did not yet know that its future was turning. The silent war room. Decisions that changed the world. Continuation. Adrien did not sit. He stood very still, as if the air itself had hardened into something that held him in place. His breath was calm, controlled, but his eyes held a fire that had been waiting for years to surface. Everyone else watched him. They were waiting for his words, yet none of them truly wished to hear them. A single command could end the peace that people had prayed for. A single hesitation could allow an enemy to advance one step too far. There were no perfect answers, only consequences. The defense minister leaned forward. His voice was steady, but his fingers trembled slightly as they touched the table. How long has a flag been there? The intelligence director responded, eyes locked on the still image. Less than an hour. They are testing us, watching us. They want us to respond. Adrien understood. It was not simply provocation. It was a lure. He closed his eyes for a moment, but not to retreat. He was remembering. He saw a village in the valley of mountains, smoke rising where houses once stood, the distant echo of voices calling names that never answered. He had been there. He had walked among ruins where war had carved its name into stone and bone. War was never a story. War was not strategy. War was the absence of everything that made people human. He opened his eyes again. The silence in the room thickened. There will be casualties, the intelligence director said quietly. Adrien's voice came slow, measured, each word shaped by experience and scars. There are always casualties. The question is who we choose them to be. No one dared to respond. The minister's eyes lowered. For the first time, he seemed not like a leader of nations, but like a man carrying a weight far too heavy for his own bones. The room's screens flickered once. A live drone feed replaced a still image. The border came into sharp clarity. Lines of troops were forming. Tanks repositioned. Commanders lifting their hands to signal something that was not yet spoken. Adrien stepped closer. His reflection hovered in the glass of the screen. A soldier shaped by time. A man shaped by choices that had returned to meet him once again. His throat tightened with something he did not express aloud. Just beyond the border, on the opposing side, he saw civilians gathering. Not soldiers. Families. Elders. Children with bags in their arms. They were not preparing for war. They were preparing for escape. The intelligence director whispered what everyone already understood. They know what is coming. Adrien's chest ached. The decision was no longer strategic. It was human, deeply and painfully human. His voice formed, quiet but absolute, opened a secure channel to the field commanders. The room moved instantly. Keyboards clicked. Encrypted networks shifted into place. Communication lines established across thousands of kilometers of land. Adrien placed both hands on the table. He felt the weight of every eye on him, every ear, every expectation. The minister spoke, his voice nearly hollow. "Your order, General Hale." Adrien stared at the border on the screen. The tanks, the soldiers, the families. His jaw clenched once. His breath steadied. He opened his mouth to speak, but the lights went out. Complete darkness. A power failure. No, something beyond that. The emergency generators did not activate. The room was swallowed in black silence. No screens. No hum of air systems. No digital heartbeat of the nation's war network. Only breathing. And a faint, distant sound that no one could identify. Something deep. Something heavy. Something moving. Adrien's hand moved instinctively toward his side, though there was no weapon here. The minister whispered into the dark, "General, what is happening?" Adrien did not answer, because he knew the decision had been taken away from them. Someone else had made it first. A soft red emergency light flickered on, just enough to reveal faces. Shadows moved along the walls like silent ghosts. And on the main screen, which should not have had power at all, a single message appeared in glowing letters. Phase 1 initiated. Adrien's pulse hammered his ears. He understood. The conflict had already begun. But by whom? And where? And how? No one yet knew. The silent war room was no longer silent. It was the eye of a storm that had already broken open. And somewhere beyond those walls, destinies were shifting. Lives were being rewritten. And the world was already changing. Yet the true consequence of that moment had not revealed itself. Not yet. Continuation. The red emergency light pulsed like a heartbeat. Slow, uncertain, alive. Adrien did not move. His silhouette stood tense against the dim glow, his posture rigid as iron. Every instinct in him sharpened. The room was no longer a chamber of strategy. It had become a battleground of the unseen. The defense minister pressed his hand against the table to steady himself. His voice wavered just slightly. The first crack in the government's calm facade. "Who authorized this?" he asked, though he already knew no one in this room had. The intelligence director was typing blindly into a dead keyboard. There was no power, yet the screen still glowed. That was impossible. Adrien stepped toward the screen. The message did not flicker. It was not broadcasting from inside their system. It was being forced onto it, like a hand closing over a mouth. Phase 1 initiated. Adrien spoke, his voice low and lined with iron. "We have lost control of our internal command network." The director froze. That should be impossible. Adrien glanced at him. His expression did not soften. Everything is impossible until it happens. The minister exhaled a single unsteady breath. The weight of realization sank into all of them. Someone had planned this long before they entered this room. Someone who understood their systems, their timing, their strategies. Someone who knew when they would hesitate. The emergency lights slowly brightened, revealing faces marked with fear they tried to hide. Adrien's gaze returned to the map, still visible now in dim red. The border, the tanks, the families. If Phase 1 had begun, then Phase 2 would not be far behind. And Phase 2 would not be a threat. It would be an action. He turned sharply. Open the physical radio line. The analog one. Manual frequencies only. The minister hesitated. That system has not been used in decades. Adrien's tone left no room for debate. It was built for a moment precisely like this one. The director crossed the room and pulled a metal cabinet open. Dust rose in the air, glittering in red light. Inside, a machine older than all of them sat silent. Dials, switches, no screens, no software to hack. Adrien reached for the main switch. His hand stopped, because the distant sound they had heard before was growing louder. Something outside the building, a vibration that crawled along the floor, like engines, but not aircraft, not tanks. It was deeper, heavier. The minister looked toward the sealed doors. "General Hale, are we under attack?" Adrien did not answer immediately. His mind was not in the room. It was racing across the city, across the border, across the fragile balance of peace that had been holding the world together by a single strained thread. If the network had been taken, if the systems had been overridden, if Phase 1 was already in motion, then the enemy was not simply outside. It was inside, not in bodies, but in control. Adrien flipped the radio switch. A crack of static filled the room. Raw, unfiltered, real. He turned the dial slowly, searching for the right frequency, searching for command, for contact, for any voice that had not already been silenced. Static, then faint speaking. A voice shaky with fear. Units falling back, border crossing, civilians scattering. Request directive, request directive. We have no orders. The soldier on the other end sounded young, far too young to witness what was unfolding. Adrien closed his eyes for the smallest of moments. He knew that voice, not the person. The age, the belief, the trust in leadership, the trust in him. He placed his hand on the transmitter button. This is General Adrien Hale. Silence followed. Then the soldier inhaled sharply. General, we need your command. What are our orders? Everyone in the room watched Adrien. They were waiting again, waiting for the words that would define the next hour, the next year, possibly the next century. Adrien's hand tightened on the transmitter. He opened his mouth, but the red emergency light flickered once more, and outside the war room doors, something stopped moving. Not slowed, stopped completely. The engines, the ground vibrations, the air pressure in the room shifted, as if the world had taken a breath and was refusing to exhale. The intelligence director stared toward the door. What was that? Adrien did not answer. His eyes were fixed on the door. He knew something was on the other side. Not an army, not an enemy soldier. Something else. Something that had not revealed its face yet. Not in this room, not in this moment, but coming, approaching, inevitable. The radio crackled again, more frantic now. General, please, what are our orders? Adrien lifted the transmitter to speak. His voice was steady, controlled, unbreakable. But what he was about to say, no one in that room was prepared to hear, and the world outside was already waiting for a command that had not yet come. The war room held its breath. The next word would change everything. Continuation. Adrien's hand hovered over the transmitter. The microphone inches from his lips, but he did not speak. Not yet. The room held its breath. A stillness, so tense it felt like the walls themselves were listening. The red emergency light cast everyone in a muted glow, as if they were figures trapped inside a moment too fragile to touch. The young soldier's voice crackled again to the analog radio, strained and fearful. General Hale, our men are waiting. The civilians are running. They are scared. They are looking at us for protection. Please, what are we supposed to do? Adrien closed his eyes, and when he opened them again, something had shifted in him. His expression was no longer uncertain. It was the expression of a man who had made peace with the weight of responsibility. He pressed the transmitter slowly, deliberately. But just before he could speak, the sealed steel doors of the war room released with a low hydraulic hiss. Every head snapped toward the entrance. A figure stepped inside. Not hurried, not panicked, not a soldier. She walked with quiet, controlled steps, her coat dark, the collar raised just enough to shadow her face. Her presence did not announce itself, but it changed the air in the room instantly. Adrien knew her, Director Selene Voss, a strategist whose name was spoken only in private chambers, classified circles, and whispered corridors. A woman who rarely appeared unless something monumental was already in motion. The minister's voice faltered. Director Voss, we were not informed you were. I was not meant to be expected, she replied, her tone calm, but edged with something sharper beneath. Her gaze swept the maps, the screens, the radio. Then it settled on Adrien. You have seconds, not minutes. Adrien did not ask how she knew. She always knew. The intelligence director stepped forward, anxiety tightening his features. Our systems have been compromised. Someone initiated Phase 1 from outside command. Selene shook her head once. No, not outside. From inside. From a clearance level higher than yours. The room stiffened. Higher than theirs? There were no clearances higher than theirs. Except one. Adrien's jaw hardened. You mean the executive charter? Selene held his gaze. Yes. The minister stepped back as if struck. You are saying the order was authorized by the president? Selene did not confirm. She did not deny. Her silence was its own answer. Adrien felt a slow, cold understanding settle through his body. If Phase 1 had been authorized at the highest level, then the war was not being forced upon them. It was being chosen, planned, prepared. The young soldier's voice crackled again over the radio, more desperate now. General Hale, they are approaching the civilian convoys. We cannot hold them much longer. We need orders. Please. Adrien turned back to the radio. Selene stepped closer. Think carefully before you speak. Once you give an order, The world will move. There is no return. Adrien looked at her. War was never avoidable, was it? Selene's eyes softened, not with sympathy, but with recognition of the burden they both carried. It could have been, but too many people profit from conflict. Peace is expensive. War is currency. Adrien's breath steadied. He pressed the transmitter button. Every sound in the room vanished under the weight of that single motion. He spoke clearly, his voice steady and resonant. This is General Adrien Hale. All units, acknowledge. Static, then responses. Voices of soldiers. Multiple units reporting in. Dozens. Hundreds. Adrien continued. Hold your formations. Protect the civilians. Do not advance unless directly engaged. Repeat. Do not initiate fire. You are to defend only. The room froze. The minister's eyes widened. You are refusing the escalation order. Adrien did not look at him. I am refusing a war built on deception. Selene watched him closely, her expression unreadable. Whether she admired him or judged him, no one could tell. The radio crackled again. Copy, General. Holding positions. Protecting civilians. Awaiting further. The transmission broke, not with static, with a sound no one wanted to hear. A distant explosion. Then another. Then screaming. The radio burst to life with chaos. They opened fire. They opened fire on the convoys. General. The line died. The room fell into a ringing silence. Adrien's hand tightened around the transmitter until the plastic creaked. The minister's voice was hollow. It has begun. Selene stepped forward, her voice lower than before. The world is watching now. Whatever you do next becomes history. Adrien did not respond immediately. He walked toward the massive map table, the borders drawn in ink that suddenly felt like scars carved into the earth itself. He rested his hand on the region now burning. His voice, when it finally emerged, carried something deep in authority. Resolve. What happens next, he said quietly, will not be decided in this room. Selene watched him. The others waited. Adrien lifted his eyes. There's another option. The minister blinked. What option? Adrien looked away from the maps, away from the screens, toward the door, toward action, toward something greater than commands and signatures. He spoke, and the words changed the air. We go there ourselves. The room fell silent. Selene's eyes widened just slightly. The minister shook his head in disbelief. You're going to front? Adrien did not answer with words. He simply turned and began walking toward the door. No one stopped him, because they all knew, the moment he stepped beyond that room, the story would no longer be strategy. It would become something far more dangerous, far more human, and far more irreversible. The sound of his footsteps echoed, slow, steady. The war room did not speak, because everyone understood. The true war had only just begun. Continuation. The steel doors opened with a heavy mechanical slide, and the corridor outside stretched forward in dim, flickering light. Adrien walked with silent purpose, each step deliberate, his boots striking the floor in a calm, controlled rhythm. Selene followed him, her movements quieter, like a shadow that understood his thoughts before he spoke them. Behind them, the minister called out, his voice strained, General Hale, if you go out there, you will not return as a commander. You will return as a target. Adrien did not stop. He did not look back. His reply carried the weight of someone who had already accepted the cost. I have been a target my entire life. They moved down the corridor and entered an elevator that was rarely used. The walls were metal, unmarked. No floor numbers. No indicator of depth. Only 2 keys could activate this elevator. Adrien had one. Selene had the other. They inserted the keys at the same time, turning them slowly. The elevator descended. There was no sound except the soft hum of machinery and the steady pattern of Adrien's breathing. Selene's eyes watched him, measuring the shifting tension beneath his stillness. You knew this was coming, she said quietly. Adrien did not deny it. There were signs, movements in the border towns, unusual troop transfers, discrepancies in communication logs. I knew someone was preparing for war. Selene tilted her head slightly. But you did not know it was your own government. Adrien finally looked at her. His expression was calm, but the truth in his eyes was sharp. I hoped it was not. The elevator slowed and stopped. The doors opened to reveal a vast underground hangar. Low lights illuminated rows of armored personnel carriers, transport vehicles, and a single black command helicopter, blade still, waiting like a creature ready to awaken. Soldiers turned as Adrien entered, their faces stunned. The first to speak was Captain Lena Vargan, her uniform marked with dust and urgency. She stepped forward quickly, saluting him. "General Hale, we received partial transmissions. We were preparing to mobilize, but orders were unclear. Are we deploying under full combat authorization?" Adrien studied her closely. She was young, but her posture held strength. Fire. Conviction. He nodded once. "We are deploying. But our mission is not to invade. It is to protect. Civilians first. Then stabilization. No aggressive advancement unless absolutely necessary." Captain Vargan exhaled as if she had been holding her breath for hours. "Yes, General." Selene stepped beside him, her voice calm but carrying strength. "We will be operating without full support from Central Command. You need to understand what that means." Adrien answered without hesitation. "It means we are alone." Selene shook her head. "No, it means we must choose who stand with us." Adrien looked across the hangar. Rows of soldiers, engineers, pilots, mechanics, people who had trained their entire lives for battle, but rarely for truth. He stepped forward, raising his voice. "Everyone." The soldiers turned fully, eyes locking on him. "The conflict you have heard about is not what it appears to be. The orders you are expecting will come from voices far above us, voices that have chosen war not for protection, but for power." Murmurs, a shifting of weight, uncertain glances. Adrien continued, voice firm but steady. "Our duty is not to obey blindly. Our duty is to defend the innocent. Our duty is to ensure that the world that comes after this does not drown in ashes." A silence formed, heavy, but not fearful. Captain Vargan stepped forward once more. "Say the word, General. We follow you." Adrien nodded. "Prepare transport. 15-minute departure." The hangar exploded into motion. Engines fueled. Weapons checked. Supplies loaded. Pilots moving with purpose. Selene stood beside Adrien as he boarded the helicopter. "You are stepping into a battlefield shaped by hands we have not seen yet." Adrien paused, one foot on the boarding rail. "There's always someone unseen, but they will reveal themselves in time." Selene looked at him, studying the lines of his face. "And when they do?" Adrien's voice carried a quiet fire. "Then the war changes." The helicopter doors slid closed. The engines roared to life. Blades spun, cutting the air into controlled fury. The ground beneath them trembled. As the helicopter lifted, the landscape came into view. The horizon was not calm. A rising column of smoke twisted into the sky. A fire burning across the border. The battle had already begun. Adrien watched in silence. The pilot spoke over the comm. "General, estimated time to border zone is 13 minutes. Enemy formations are moving rapidly. Civilians scattered along the main highway. No clear safe zones." Adrien leaned forward. "Plot a landing near the North Ridge. We assist evacuation first. Once civilians are secured, we reinforce defensive positions." "Yes, General." Selene glanced at him. "There is something else you need to see." She handed him a small tablet, battery, independent, offline. A video file was already open. Adrien pressed play. The screen showed a figure in the shadows of a war bunker, a voice distorted, disguised. They spoke a sentence that froze Adrien's breath in his chest. "Adrien Hale will not leave the front alive." Selene watched him. His expression did not break. Not fear, not surprise. Only a single realization. The war was not only between nations. It was against him. The helicopter flew forward into the rising smoke. The world waited on the edge of consequence. And what came next would shape everything. But the moment of impact, the moment everything changed, had not yet arrived. Continuation. The helicopter cut through the sky, blades carving the smoke-laced wind with heavy force. The landscape below was shifting into chaos. Highways choked with fleeing vehicles. Abandoned belongings scattered like fragments of lives interrupted. A line of fire traced the horizon where artillery had already touched the earth. Adrien watched everything in silence. His jaw remained set, but his eyes carried the weight of every civilian running for safety, every soldier trapped between duty and fear, every life balanced on a decision he had not yet made. Captain Vargan's voice came through the comm link from the transport just behind them. "General, convoy sighted. They are pinned on the northern pass. Multiple civilian transports blocked by debris. Enemy units advancing from the east ridge. If we do not intervene now." Adrien responded immediately. "We intervene. Prepare ground landing. I am taking point." Selene turned her head toward him sharply. "You intend to go down there yourself." Adrien's gaze did not shift from the burning earth below. "If I command others to risk their lives while I remain above them, then I am not a leader. I am a director of death." Selene did not argue. She already knew there was no force in the world that could keep him in the helicopter once civilians were in danger. The pilot adjusted altitude. Approaching landing zone. Heavy smoke cover. Visibility low. The helicopter descended. Wind whipped dirt and ash into spirals. Heat rose in waves from the ground. The engine strained against turbulence that did not belong to weather, but to conflict. When the doors slid open, the heat hit Adrien like a wall. He stepped down, and the battlefield unfolded around him. Civilians huddled behind overturned vehicles. Mothers shielding children. Elderly men clutching hands that trembled but refused to let go. A group of soldiers formed a defensive line, outnumbered, strained, every breath a fight. Explosions echoed from the ridge. Dust and shattered stone rained down in heavy bursts. Adrien walked forward, unhurried, as if the world was not burning. His presence alone caused the soldiers to straighten, their fear settling into resolve. Captain Vargan ran up beside him, helmet coated in ash. "We were holding them back, but they are pressing hard. If they break the line, they will reach the civilians." Adrien surveyed the field. "Then we do not allow them to break." Selene stood at his side now, watching every movement with sharp calculation. The enemy forces were advancing through the smoke, shapes emerging and fading like ghosts in battle haze. Their formation was precise, not reckless, not desperate. This was not chaos. This was strategy. Adrien's hand lowered to the sidearm at his hip, but he did not yet draw it. He lifted his voice, loud enough for those near him to hear. "We hold this ground, not for glory, not for territory, but because these people have the right to live." The soldiers around him tightened their grips, their breaths aligned. Their fear did not fade, but it no longer ruled them. A child behind a burned vehicle watched Adrien, with wide eyes. Her hand clutched a small wooden doll, its paint chipped, its clothes torn. The doll trembled because her hand trembled. Adrien met her eyes for one moment. It was enough. He turned his gaze back to the advancing line. Captain Vargan's voice came low, tense. "They are coming." Adrien lifted his hand. Every soldier readied. The enemy began their approach. But before the first shot was fired, a second formation appeared behind them, a force neither side had expected. Black-clad units, uniforms without insignia, faces masked, weapons held with the calm of men who had killed many times before. Selene's breath drew in sharply, controlled but strained. That is not the opposing army. Those are operatives. Adrien's expression hardened. He knew, the moment he saw them, these were the ones who had initiated Phase 1, not to win territory, but to remove him. The battlefield was no longer about nations. It was about erasing a man from the story of the world before he changed its path. The massed formation began to split, moving in a pattern designed to separate Adrien from his forces. Captain Vargan's hand tightened on her rifle. "They are targeting you, General." Adrien did not step back. He stepped forward. Selene reached for his arm, stopping him for one breath. "If they remove you here, everything collapses." Adrien looked at her with a calm that carried something older than fear. Then we make sure they do not. The operatives advanced. The air thickened. The civilians trembled behind shattered vehicles, waiting for a command that would determine whether they lived or died. Adrien lifted his hand again, but he did not speak yet, because the next word he gave would ignite everything. The soldiers waited. The enemy waited. Even the smoke seemed to hang in the air, unmoving. The world held itself perfectly still, and the decision that would shape everything remained unspoken. Continuation. Adrien's raised hand did not signal attack. It signaled silence. A silence thick enough that even the advancing operatives paused, not from hesitation, but from calculation. Smoke curled through the air like restless spirits. Heat shimmered across the broken road. The child with the wooden doll stopped trembling, watching him with wide, unblinking eyes. Every heartbeat on the field aligned to his stillness. Captain Vargan whispered beside him, barely audible, "General, if you wait any longer, they will fire first." Adrien did not answer. He did not need to. His eyes were locked on the black-clad leader stepping forward from the enemy formation. This man moved with measured certainty. No emblem, no rank pins, no national identity. A soldier shaped by command without a flag. He stopped a few paces away, close enough for his voice to reach, but far enough that the air between them remained a boundary. General Adrien Hale. His voice was controlled, dry, unburdened by emotion. Adrien kept his stance calm. "You know my name, but your presence here tells me you do not know what it means." The masked leader tilted his head, almost studying him. "We know exactly what it means. It means complication." Adrien's eyes sharpened. "And you were sent to remove the complication." The masked leader did not deny it. "It is not personal. The world does not need heroes. It needs compliance." Selene took a single step closer to Adrien, her gaze fixed on the masked commander. "Who issued your directive?" The commander's reply was quiet, steady, unwavering. "The same authority that authorized the war you were trying to prevent." A tremor of realization moved through the soldiers behind Adrien. Not fear, not confusion. Recognition. War was not being responded to. War was being manufactured. Captain Vargan's voice dropped, heavy and low. "This is planned. All of it. They are not here to win territory. They are here to control the narrative." Adrien's jaw tightened. The masked commander spoke again. "You leaving this field alive disrupts the outcome that has already been calculated. If you fall here, your forces fracture. The civilians become collateral. The war expands. Control is restored." Adrien looked at him with clarity that carried no anger, only truth. Control built on the graves of the innocent will always collapse. The masked leader exhaled once, slow, almost weary. "Then your death must serve a purpose greater than you." Adrien lowered his raised hand. The signal. But the signal was not attack. It was move. In a single motion, his soldiers shifted their formation. No panic, no disorder. They had trained under him long enough to understand unspoken command. They formed a protective half-ring around the civilians. Not aggression. Defense. The masked operatives hesitated, not because they feared the soldiers, but because the civilians were no longer unshielded. Killing Adrien now required killing those people too, and that was not part of their mission. Yet, the battlefield held stillness again, but this time it was a blade's edge. "We both know this is temporary," the masked commander said. "The bigger forces are already moving, and when they arrive, you will have no shield to stand behind." Adrien stepped forward just slightly. "I do not stand behind shields." The wind shifted. Smoke rolled across the ground like a living tide. A distant thunder began building from beyond the ridge. Engines, columns of vehicles, something massive approaching. Captain Vargan's eyes widened as she recognized the sound. "They are bringing armored divisions." Selene's voice remained calm, but a deeper tension threaded her words. "They are forcing scale. They want the world to see this as an invasion." Adrien's eyes tracked the horizon. He understood. If armored units reached this valley, the narrative would be sealed. History would record him as the spark of war. Unless he moved now, He looked to his soldiers, to the civilians, to the ground they stood upon, to the mask of the commander who had come to erase him. He spoke quietly, just loud enough for his own to hear. "We are changing the field." Captain Vargan blinked. "To where, General?" Adrien turned his gaze toward the distant mountain pass. "Narrow, rugged, defensible. We lead them away from the civilians, into terrain where numbers mean less than strategy." Selene nodded once, understanding instantly. "You're drawing them into a chessboard only you know how to play." Adrien's voice was steady. "Exactly." Captain Vargan relayed the new orders. "Civilian convoy, move out. Northern pass route. Escorts the perimeter." The soldiers moved, guiding terrified families toward the escape path. The masked operatives saw the shift. They moved as well. Faster now. More aggressive. The masked commander took one deliberate step closer to Adrien. "You cannot protect them all." Adrien did not step back. "I do not need protect all of them." His voice held an iron certainty. "Only enough." The masked commander stood silent for a moment. Then he lifted his hand. His operatives surged forward. Adrien drew his weapon at last, but not to fire, to lead. He stepped directly into the advancing line. Selene followed. Captain Vargan followed. The soldiers followed. There was no shout, no battle cry, no call to glory. Just movement, focused, driven, unbreakable. The enemy forces closed in. The smoke thickened. The world narrowed to heartbeats and footsteps. But the moment of clash, the collision that would decide everything, hung in the air just out of reach, suspended, waiting, held by the breath of fate itself. And the war had not yet truly begun. Ending episode. The air around them thickened with the pressure of imminent collision. Yet instead of rushing forward, Adrien halted once more. The masked commander slowed as well, as if sensing the shift. The valley was no longer filled with the sound of marching feet or engines. Only the wind remained, curling over stone and ash, carrying the scent of smoke and iron. Adrien lowered his weapon. For the first time since the standoff began, he allowed his voice to soften. "You said the world does not need heroes," he said. The masked commander remained unreadable behind the dark visor. Adrien continued, "But the world does not break because of heroes or villains. It breaks when good men stop choosing, when decisions are made in silence, behind rooms with no windows, by hands that never touch the soil they scorch." The commander's fingers twitched at his side, not with impatience, with something closer to uncertainty. "None of us choose where we begin," Adrien said, "but we choose where we stand." The masked commander seemed smaller now, the lines of his stance less rigid. The war machine behind him, a system built on chain commands and cold arithmetic, felt suddenly fragile. He spoke quietly. "There is no undoing what has already been set in motion." Adrien's answer held neither anger nor defeat. "Then let us be the first to acknowledge it, not with blood, but with truth." The thunder of engines finally reached the valley's edge. Massive silhouettes appeared through the smoke, armored vehicles rolling into position. Every soldier, on both sides, braced for the inevitable, but the masked commander raised his hand. Not to advance. To stop. The heavy machine slowed. The battlefield exhaled. Selene closed her eyes, just for a moment, relief washing over her like a cool tide. Vargan lowered her rifle, her shoulders trembling with exhaustion. Adrien and the masked commander stood only a few paces apart. Two men carved by different histories, standing in the center of a world that bowed to the will of neither. The commander spoke again, his voice lower, stripped of the measure control he had carried until now. "If I stand down, I will be replaced." Adrien nodded. "And so will I." The commander looked at him then, really looked, at the man who refused to let the world decide what was necessary. He removed his mask, not as surrender, as recognition. His face was worn, scarred, human. Adrien extended his hand. The commander looked at it for a long, quiet moment. When he reached out and accepted it, the valley changed. Not through grand declaration, not through victory or defeat, but through choice. No explosions. No final charge. No triumphant song. Just a silent agreement between two men who had stood long enough in the shadow of decisions made by others. The armored vehicles did not advance. The civilians reached the mountain pass. The soldiers lowered their weapons. The war that was meant to ignite the world simply did not. And history would never record this moment, because the greatest wars are not always ended with force. Sometimes they end in a single shared breath between those who are willing to stand quietly against the machinery of fate. The valley remained silent, not out of fear, but because, for the first time in a very long time, the world had paused to let peace speak.